A park ranger quit after he found this. And if Appalachian Mountains horror stories are your thing, you're going to understand exactly why by the end of it. In May of 2016, 6 miles off the maintained trail system inside the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, a 17-year backcountry ranger named Tack Mayfield was finishing a routine boundary survey near Hazel Creek. What he found wedged between 2 hemlocks that afternoon ended his career by the next morning. By the time the story reached the ranger station, one man who'd rented that campsite months earlier was gone. His wife was gone with him, and the man who filed the incident report never worked another shift in a national park again. This is what happened to Tack Mayfield. Badge number 47 had been pinned to his chest since the year he turned 22, and in 17 seasons, he never once traded a boundary survey for a shift behind the visitor center desk. His supervisors stopped fighting him on it around year 5. Mayfield trusted his own eyes over a GPS unit, especially out past the rhododendron slicks where satellites had a habit of losing their nerve. So he still carried a Panasonic cassette recorder for his field notes, the same model he'd used since 1999, thumbing it on and off out of pure habit. Dispatch had him down for a 6 o'clock check-in, standard procedure for a solo survey this far off grid. Miss the call, and a 2-man team gets sent to your last known coordinates by 7. Mayfield liked margin, so he cut the survey short by an hour, moving fast through the slick above the creek toward the truck. That decision was the only reason he ever set foot in the hollow at all. The GPS had agreed with his topo map for 6 straight miles, ridge for ridge, switchback for switchback. Then the screen blinked twice and reset itself to a set of coordinates that put him standing in the middle of Fontana Lake, nowhere close to where his boots actually were. He'd radioed his position twice that morning without a hitch. The 3rd call didn't go through at all. He didn't think much of it yet. He would. That's when he saw the roofline through the trees, low and white, wedged where no vehicle had any business being. A 1987 Fleetwood Bounder motorhome sat pinned between 2 hemlocks in a hollow with no logging road anywhere near it, no fire trail, and, Mayfield checked twice, not one tire rut in the leaf litter leading up to it. Like something had set it down there instead of driving it in. He'd spend the rest of his life turning that detail over. But it wasn't the strangest thing about the Bounder, not even close. The paint was showroom clean. Factory white, a faded blue racing stripe, not a scratch on the ladder rack. The kind of clean that didn't belong 6 miles off any road. Mayfield walked the length of it once, running his glove along the siding out of habit. And that's when his boots stopped moving on their own. Every window on that motorhome was coated black from the inside. A greasy film, the kind that clings to glass after a fire, except there wasn't a scorch mark anywhere on the frame, and nothing in the air smelled like smoke. What it smelled like was ozone, and underneath that, something closer to burnt hair. Mayfield stood there a full 10 seconds before his hand found the door handle. It gave easier than it should have. The door swung open on a hinge that didn't so much as creak, which struck Mayfield as its own kind of wrong. 17 years of Park Service vehicles had taught him every door out here groaned about something. This one opened like it had been oiled that morning. The cab was clean, cleaner than his own truck. No wrappers, no dust on the dash, no sun bleaching on the vinyl the way Carolina Summers should have left it. Whoever had lived in this thing had kept it like a church. Sitting on the driver's seat, the only surface that looked touched at all, was a second cassette recorder. Same make as his, same decade, the kind of unit you didn't see much outside surplus stores and old Ranger trucks. Its little red light was lit. Recording. Mayfield leaned in and checked the reel behind the plastic window. It wasn't turning. He tapped the side of it the way you'd tap an old TV, and the light stayed steady, stayed red. The reel stayed dead still, like it had already finished saying whatever it needed to say, and was just waiting for him to notice. Mayfield had documented enough of these boundary hollows to know what didn't belong in one. The counter was frozen on 47 minutes. He'd think about that number longer than he'd admit to anyone at the station. He nearly missed the visor entirely. Wedged behind the driver's side sun visor, tucked in like someone meant to keep it close and forget where they'd put it, was a small wooden bird, hand-carved, no bigger than a thumb, no maker's mark stamped anywhere on it. Mayfield turned it over once in his glove, found nothing else about it worth noting, and slid it back exactly where he'd found it. It would sit in the back of his mind for years without him ever knowing why. He pocketed the recorder instead. Outside the bounder, the hollow held onto its smell, that same ozone and burnt hair combination, thicker now that he'd been standing here a few minutes, like the motorhome itself was still slowly breathing it out. Mayfield had smelled scorched wiring before. House fires, engine fires, the occasional lightning strike splitting a ridge pine down to its roots. This wasn't any of those. This was something closer to a bad perm left too long under the dryer, and under that, a copper tang that made the back of his throat go tight, the kind of taste that stayed with him long after he'd left the hollow behind. He checked his watch. 5:40, 19 minutes to make the 6 o'clock call, and he still had to hike back through the slick to reach the truck. He should have started walking right then. Instead, he climbed into the cab of his own truck once he reached it, laid the strange recorder on the passenger seat next to his own, and told himself he'd just take a listen on the drive back. Nothing wrong with a head start on the paperwork. That was the decision. Not the hollow, not the bounder, not the smell. The decision to press play before he ever radioed it in. His thumb found the button. The tape hissed for 3 full seconds before anything came through. The kind of hiss that makes you turn the volume up, which Mayfield did, right before a man's voice cut through the static clean as a bell, close to the mic like he was talking directly into it and not narrating anything at all. "Day 1, the voice said. "Estelle thinks I'm being paranoid about the noise on the roof." Mayfield's hand hovered over the volume knob. He didn't touch it. There was something about the calm in that voice, steady, almost bored, that made him want to hear the rest exactly as it came. No adjustments, nothing softened. He glanced once at the dashboard clock, 5:52. 8 minutes to the call, and the truck was still parked, engine idling, tires not moving an inch toward the ranger station. The reel kept spinning now, easy as anything, like it had only ever been waiting for someone to ask it to. The tape kept running, and Mayfield kept driving, one hand on the wheel and one thumb hovering near the stop button he never pressed. Day 1 had been almost pleasant. Poston talking about campgrounds he wanted to hit before the weather turned, fishing spots on the Tuckasegee he'd mapped out for the fall. Estelle's voice came through once, too, farther from the mic, saying something about the hummingbird feeder needing sugar water before the frost came in. Retirement talk. The kind of tape Mayfield had heard 100 times from folks parked out here chasing quiet. Day 2, more of the same. A little knocking on the roof around midnight that Poston chalked up to a branch. Day 3, the knocking came back, and this time Poston noted the branch theory didn't hold. There wasn't a tree close enough to the bounder to drop anything on it, and he'd checked. By day 4, something in Poston's voice had changed. Flatter, slower, like each word cost him something to get out. He didn't mention the knocking again. He talked instead about something standing at the tree line most nights around 3, too tall to fit properly under his own awning, and how he'd started leaving the porch light off so it wouldn't know he'd seen it. Mayfield's hands went cold on the wheel. Day 6 was the one that stuck to him for the rest of his life. Estelle's voice, close enough to the mic this time that Mayfield could hear her breathing between words. "Gerald, why are you recording at 3 in the morning?" Nothing came back. No answer. Just the tape hiss and, underneath it, something that might have been Poston breathing, might have been the recorder's motor working too hard in the cold. Estelle asked the question 3 more times across the next 40 seconds. Poston never answered once, not because he wasn't there. Mayfield could hear him. He just wasn't answering her anymore. His first field training officer's voice surfaced then, unbidden, the one she'd drilled into every rookie before sending them out alone. "You radio in the second the hair on your arm moves, not after you've talked yourself out of it." Mayfield heard it clear as the tape itself. His hand didn't move toward the radio. The dial read 1 bar, and dropping. Day 7 arrived on the tape the same way it must have arrived in that hollow, without warning. A whisper cut in close to the mic, not Poston's voice. Lower, patient, almost gentle, the way you'd talk to somebody you didn't want to wake up too fast. "She's asleep now." 3 words. Mayfield played that stretch back twice without meaning to, his thumb finding rewind on its own. The voice used no name. It didn't need to. Whoever it belonged to already knew who was listening, and knew Estelle wasn't going to answer for herself again. Day 8 gave him nothing but breathing, long even, patient breathing, close enough to the mic that Mayfield swore he could hear the wet catch of it on every inhale. No words, no knocking, just breath, steady as a held note, going on longer than any one person's lungs should have carried it. Day 9 was the same, breathing, then something that might have been a second set of lungs joining the first, matched so close in rhythm that Mayfield couldn't tell where one ended and the other started. The truck's radio holder had 1 bar the last time he checked it. He glanced down now and found it dropped to 0 the exact moment he keyed the mic to finally call it in. The driver's door, which had latched clean on every trip he'd ever taken in this truck, refused to shut on the first try. He slammed it twice before it caught. Mayfield sat there with the engine running and both recorders side by side on the passenger seat, the reel from the Bounder still turning past Day 9 into a low, steady hum underneath the tape hiss he hadn't noticed until just now and couldn't place and didn't want to. Mayfield made the 6 o'clock call after all, barely. He keyed the radio at 5:59. Dispatch picked up on the second ring, and for one clean moment, everything about the day sounded almost normal again. He gave his position, said he was inbound, said nothing about the Bounder or the tape or the 2 recorders sitting on his passenger seat like a matched pair of loaded guns. That part he wanted to say in person. The fire road out of Hazel Creek wasn't rated for the speed he took it at. Gravel kicked up hard enough to ping the wheel wells, and the engine ran hotter than he'd ever let it run. But Mayfield didn't ease off once. Both recorders sliding across the seat every time he hit a rut. Elkmont Ranger Station still had its lights on when he pulled in, which was the only reason he didn't wait until morning. He walked in holding the cassette out in front of him before he'd said a single word. No hello, no explanation, just the recorder held out like evidence at a trial nobody had scheduled yet. Station Chief Hadley Kemp looked up from the desk, saw what was in Mayfield's hand, and went gray. Not confused, not curious. Gray the way a man goes when he recognizes something he'd hoped never to see again. "Put that back where you found it, son." Mayfield opened his mouth to explain the hollow, the Bounder, the 9 days of tape. Kemp didn't let him get past the first word. Last man who played a tape out of that hollow left his family inside a week. Never spoke again after. Kemp knew which hollow before Mayfield ever said Hazel Creek. He knew because he'd logged those same coordinates himself, 34 years earlier, in a file that wasn't supposed to leave the station basement, and hadn't until tonight, when Kemp stood up without another word and went to get it. He set the folder down between them, like it might still be listening. Inside was an incident report from 1982, yellowed at the edges, water-stained where the basement had flooded some winter nobody remembered anymore, and clipped to the front of it, an evidence tag with a number stamped in old typewriter ink. 47. The same number stamped on Mayfield's own badge, issued to him at the academy, the year he was born. Mayfield's mouth went dry enough that swallowing hurt. He looked at the tag, then at Kemp, then back at the tag, waiting for one of them to make sense of the other. Neither did. "That's not possible," he said, and even as the words left him, he understood how thin they sounded against a folder that had been sitting in that basement since before he could walk. Kemp didn't argue with him. Kemp just looked tired, the particular tired of a man who'd spent 34 years hoping he'd never have to open that drawer again. The recorder on the desk between them was still running. Still had been the whole time. Red light steady, counter frozen at 47 minutes, exactly where it had stopped somewhere back in the hollow. Mayfield hadn't touched it since the truck. He wasn't sure either of them wanted to, but the hiss coming off it wasn't flat anymore. Mayfield's ears kept snagging on a rhythm buried under the static. 2 beats, a pause, 2 beats, over and over, patient as a heartbeat, patient as somebody who had all night. He'd heard that exact cadence before, hours ago, standing outside the Bounder with his glove flat against the aluminum siding, feeling the metal hum under his palm, and telling himself it was just settling in the heat. It wasn't settling. It was tapping. It had been tapping the whole time from the inside, and the recorder had caught every beat of it, without either of them noticing until this exact second, in this exact room, with a badge number staring up from a 34-year-old file that had his birth year written on it in the same ink as everything else. Kemp reached over and finally thumbed the recorder off. The red light died. The 2 beats didn't. Mayfield heard them once more, clear as anything, coming from somewhere close enough to feel. Not from the recorder anymore, not from the tape, but from the wall behind Kemp's desk, or maybe the floor beneath his own boots, or maybe from somewhere he couldn't point to at all. 2 beats, a pause, 2 beats, waiting on him to answer back the way Poston never had. Neither man in that office said another word for a long time. Out past the window, the tree line sat where it always had, giving no sign of what had followed Mayfield the 6 miles back to town. Mayfield filed his resignation over the phone the next morning before he'd even had coffee. No dramatic scene, no argument with Kemp, just a short call and a badge number that would sit unclaimed in a drawer from here on out. Within the month, he'd relocated to a 1-room cabin outside Marlinton, West Virginia, far enough from Hazel Creek that the drive alone took most of a day, close enough to the mountains that he never fully left them behind. He never applied for another Park Service job, never so much as sent in a resume, though a few old colleagues reached out over the years asking if he'd come back. He always said no and never gave them a reason. He still lives there now. Every year on May 16th, an unmarked cassette shows up on his porch rail. Always at 3:07 in the morning. Never sooner. Never later. Not once in the years he's been keeping track. 47 minutes of tape. Same as the counter that froze in that hollow. Mostly, it's wind moving through hemlock branches, the kind of sound Mayfield used to log without a second thought back when he still carried a recorder for a living. Nothing on it worth flagging. Nothing that would make a new ranger think twice, until the last second. Something exhales close enough to the mic to fog it, and then the tape runs out, and Mayfield doesn't rewind it to check what came right before that breath. He never has. He tells himself there's nothing to check for. That a man who spent 17 years trusting his own eyes over every instrument the Park Service ever handed him doesn't need a machine to tell him what he already knows. He still trusts his own eyes. That much never changed. He just doesn't go looking anymore for what's making the sound outside the cabin at 3 in the morning. He listens long enough to know it's still out there, and then he lets the tape run out on its own, same as he lets that last breath fog the mic without ever rewinding to hear what came before it. The wooden bird from behind the visor never turned up again. Not in Poston's belongings when they were finally cataloged. Not in evidence. Not in a single line of Kemp's old file. Nobody at the station ever mentioned it, not once in all the years since. Mayfield still doesn't know where it went. He thinks about it more than he'd admit to anyone who asked, turning it over the same way he once turned it over in his glove that afternoon in the hollow. No maker's mark, no explanation, small enough to disappear into a coat pocket and stay there for good. Somewhere in a station basement, a file with the number 47 stamped on its evidence tag sits exactly where Kemp left it, in a drawer nobody's opened again since that night. Kemp retired not long after Mayfield did. Nobody else at the station has ever gone looking for it, and nobody's asked why. And 6 miles off the maintained trail near Hazel Creek, past the rhododendron slick and the last ridge the GPS ever agreed on, a hollow with no logging road and no fire trail sits the way it's always sat. Waiting. The way Mayfield figures it's been waiting a long time before he ever wandered into it, and the way it'll likely keep waiting long after he's gone. He doesn't go back. He doesn't have to. Every May 16th at 3:07 in the morning, the hollow finds him instead,